And I want to conclude, I want to end my message today by sharing a story with you. And this is, without any exaggeration, the story from church history that has affected my life the most. I still remember the day I heard it the first time I read it in a secular history book. And I had to shut the book and just sit back and think about it for a while and allow the Holy Spirit to move in my heart, because it struck me so deep in my heart, and I pray it will with yours as well today. It's a story about this ship. It's called the Empress of Ireland. This ship left its harbor in Canada on May 29th, 1914. 1,477 people were on board. And I guess that when they boarded the ship, they might have felt a little bit of unease, because just 2 years prior to this departure was the disaster of the Titanic. A ship who came across the Atlantic in the opposite direction, going from Southampton, aiming for the United States. This one went from Canada, aiming for London. But I guess that the people on board, the passengers, assumed that, a thing like that cannot really happen twice, can it? Unfortunately, it did. And I don't know why this ship and this tragedy is more buried in history than Titanic, because actually more people perished in this disaster than in the Titanic disaster. This ship had not even been out for 24 hours, where in the middle of the night it collided with a small Norwegian coal transporting ship, and it started sinking. A big difference, however, compared to Titanic, who took 3.5 hours for it to sink, and allowing many people to be saved in and through the lifeboats, the Empress of Ireland sank in 14 minutes. The whole ship went down in no time. There was no chance even for one single lifeboat to be lowered as a tool of salvation for the passengers. The only possible way that people would survive this disaster was if they were lucky enough to get hold of a life vest that will keep them afloat in the freezing cold water until the first rescue boats came close. If you didn't have a life vest, you didn't have any hope of survival whatsoever. After this disaster, when they gathered the survivors and started interviewing them to find out what had really happened and try to get a picture of what had happened during these few minutes and hours that followed after the Empress of Ireland went down, a very special story started to emerge. And as the story got clearer and clearer, it turned out that every single kind of arrow pointed in the direction of a certain group that was among the 1,400 passengers on the Empress of Ireland. On board this ship was 120 teenagers from the Canadian Salvation Army. They were on the way to London to attend the big Salvation Army youth conference. And these Salvation Army teenagers, they had all to have their cabins close to the area where the life vest was stored. So many of them, most of them actually, got hold of a life vest before they got out of the ship and got into the water. But the thing that was so special is that every single testimony from the survivors told one and the same story. That these young people, having had a life vest and thus having had a chance of survival for themselves, had done something very special. Once they were in the water, realizing they had a life vest, but many others didn't have one, they had all done the same thing. There were no leader calling out to the group saying, this is what we all should do now. They all reacted instinctively and spontaneously. But every single one of them took off their own life vest and started throwing them to people that didn't have one of their own. Every single one. These are teenagers. These are people who had their whole life left to live in front of them, but still they chose to save others rather than saving themselves. One of the most touching testimonies that I read from the Empress of Ireland came from a man who was 38 years old. And when he told his story, he was one of those who ended up in the water with no life vest. And he felt the cold come into his body. He felt the waves and the currents, and he realized, I'm going to die tonight. There is not a chance I'll be able to keep my head above the surface for longer than a few more minutes. But right at that point, he saw a girl come swimming toward him. He estimated her age to about 18 years old. She was fighting the currents. She was fighting the waves, looking at him. And as soon as she was close enough, she took off her life vest and she threw it right at him. And of course, receiving it, there was something in him that wanted to keep it, because we all want to live, we all want to survive. But at the same time, his conscience started to bother him, because she's only a girl. She's half his age. So he took the life vest and threw it back at her, and he said, no, save yourself instead. You got so much life left to live. And in his testimony, he said that when she received the life vest, when he threw it back at her, she became furious. And she took the life vest and she threw it back at him a second time. And she screamed out words that I guess he would never ever forget as long as he would live. You take it, because I will die better than you tonight. I will die better than you tonight. And that's where I had to close the book and just take a few deep breaths. You know why? Because I just looked right into the face of the original version of Christianity. Giving your life for someone else. This young girl's perspective was this: if you die tonight without knowing Jesus, you will be eternally lost. But if I die tonight, I know where I'm going. I'm just going to go there a little bit sooner than I initially thought and planned. But it's better that I die, because I'll die better and you will have a second chance. He never saw her again. None of the Salvation Army teenagers survived this disaster, but they saved 120 lives that night by living for others. And if I know my God correctly, they are wearing golden crowns in heaven. And they left us a legacy to follow, the original version of Christianity. I started thinking to myself, what kind of message would have been preached to these young people? What kind of impact would they have had from their Christian heritage? What kind of message would they have heard? I guess they didn't hear the message, well, this is 5 steps to prosperity. I don't think so. I don't think they heard message like, 3 steps to this and how to be cool and how to look good and how to be trendy. They heard the original version. It's all about God and it's all about others. Their leader, General William Booth, that was the core message of his life. He lived to be an old man. He died in 1912. But the last few years of his life, he only preached that message. Others, 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 others. Right before he died, he was actually scheduled to go to Stockholm, to my country, to preach at a big conference. He had to cancel because of health issues. But he sent a telegram. And he asked that this telegram would be read because it contained the full sermon that he initially intended to preach in his visit to Stockholm. And the telegram came. And at this great big conference, they opened the telegram and they read it out, only to find there was only one word in the telegram. Others.